I walked into the costume area and there were 6 naked sea devils and I was flabbergasted.
Ready when you are.
Subs, silks, saltwater, all on this sword fight special of I'll Explain Later, the Doctor Who podcast that can't fix itself to anywhere, with your hosts John West
and Matt Needer. Also contains sea devils. Tonight, the Master drops a clanger while Joe heads up the shaft. Will it be second time lucky for the Third Doctor? And how long will we resist the temptation to make a seaman joke? We make a fresh round of sandwiches and tuck into the sea devils.
And the 13th Doctor, Yaz and Dan are facing a proper China crisis as a gang of swarthy sea devils head to the poles. Hidden treasure? With Captain Chibnall at the helm, what could go wrong? We skim stones at Legend of the Sea Devils.
Hello, John.
Matt.
It's been a while, hasn't it?
The podcast is called I'll Explain Later.
And so true to form, this is a lot later than planned,
much later than
yes.
much later than billed.
To clarify, John and I have spoken to each other once or twice in the preceding 18 months, but
through our lawyers, yeah.
Yeah, but but not on a hot mic, as you put it earlier.
Hot.
It's hot to trot.
Hot mic.
Hot to trot. But anyway, we're back. We're talking about Doctor Who.
But in a slightly different way.
Yes, we've rearranged the deck chairs somewhat on this
as they slide precipitously off the deck.
Yeah, we've made a few changes for this this go around. So obviously, people who are still subscribed to this podcast might have been waiting for some time for this episode to roll around, but we can guarantee that you are not going to have to wait so long for the next episode, because for this season of I'll Explain Later, which we're billing as Season 3, the episodes are going to be coming at you weekly for the next 6 weeks.
God, that sounds like a threat.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to listen to them weekly, I suppose.
I wouldn't.
So we're going to be talking about 2 Doctor Who stories per episode, one from the old series, one from the new series.
We used to talk about 3, so that's the innovation right there.
That's the innovation. Less Doctor Who chat more frequently for a shorter period of time. It's like we looked at Flux and thought, yeah, what people really want from their Doctor Who is 6 weeks concentrated bursts and then go very quiet again for a while.
That's exactly what... Yeah, exactly.
But anyway, let's not waste any more time. Let's get on with talking about Doctor Who. And the first story that we're going to be talking about tonight is The Sea Devils, 1972. Thank you very much. Immediately
Great
fell at
start.
the first hurdle there. Great start. 1972, this is
a cool 51 years ago now.
Bloody hell.
I know, right?
I mean, not that we were born then. It's not like we're feeling old. But
look, we were born in 83, so that's 11 years. You know, we both turned 40 this year. We're recording this in 2023, lest any of we listen to this in years to come. God only knows. The typical thing about this podcast is you've had to wait years for the next episode, so you might have gone back anyway when we do season 4 in 2085. But no, so like when you're born 11 years after this, I just remember, I think this was one of the ones they showed at the Doctor Who Appreciation Society at school lunch times.
Yes.
Because it was on VHS and all that. And so we would have watched this, I guess, in 95-ish.
Yeah.
So at that point, you know, it wasn't that long after. Whereas, obviously a lot of time has passed since. So we have an attachment to that era because it was, when we were growing up, it was shows like this. I know I see John Raines, of Smersh Pod, the Bond podcast. He's just started Columpod, looking at Columbo. And we're talking about Doctor Who from the 70s and that. And he was talking about, in that podcast, he talks about them watching that kind of stuff, if I was sick and, after the news on BBC One, then Columbo would come on. And I just think there's that, we're of an era where that telly from sort of 10 or 15 years before us
old
was
telly
repeated.
Was there to be comforting.
Yeah. And so that's why, have affection for it. But yeah, when you do look back now, it does feel like a long time ago.
It was a long time ago. But it was also the third series with John Pertwee at the helm, the third story of John Pertwee's third series.
Season 9.
Season 9, that's right. And it starts with the Doctor and Joe Grant going to visit the previous season's recurring villain, the Master, in his castle prison, where he was sent to at the end of the Demons. The Demons? We'll figure that out when we get to it. Sure, why not?
We'll sort that out in the edit.
But while they're there, the Doctor clocks that ships are going missing mysteriously, and soon uncovers a race of reptiles, the aquatic brethren of the Silurians, who he encountered a couple of years earlier. And it turns out that they...
Which offers him something of a playbook in the Sea Devils, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think we might get onto that. But yes, they are keen to arise from beneath the waves and reclaim the planet that they rightfully see as theirs.
See as theirs?
And, well, I mean, I guess...
okay, you think that they've got every right to... go on, let's hear this then. This will be interesting.
Well... Okay, well, no, we could get into that. I mean, it's an interesting dilemma that it poses, really, of like, it's a good old switcheroo, which, I mean, so good that they did it twice in the classic series, and obviously then had several further goes later in the classic series.
Although Elizabeth Sandifer in the Hereditarium press. Hereditarium, I think it is. A blog
so sophisticated we can't even pronounce its name. It's a very good blog.
But yeah, did say that it may be a bit rum to have a go at Barry Letts and Terence Dix and Malcolm Hulke for sort of rehashing it when obviously the Troughton period did kind of back-to-back base under siege crap. So, we'll get on to whether it was worth mining this territory again. I personally think it was, and there's a lot to commend this. But
so, John, did you like it? Did you like the Sea Devils?
Loved it. Really enjoyed it. Thought it had a lot to offer. And actually, some of the ancillary characters, in particular Colonel Trenchard, I thought there was a lot of really interesting stuff going on with that had wider resonance, and of course the awful Ministry guy, whatever his name is, Walker. I think that those characters are so well drawn, and there's so many lovely details, and we'll come on to the characterization in the writing, but I also want to pay tribute to the director, because
Michael Bryan.
Yeah, because I mean there were some beautiful shots, like when I think it's episode 1 where the Doctor and the salty sea dog, one might even call him a seaman.
You get one.
But when they're walking along the jetty and he basically bribes the guy to not mention they haven't gone straight back to unit, and can he borrow his boat? And it made me realise that they're walking along the jetty, and yet there's probably a cameraman either walking backwards or they've laid a track to go backwards all the way watching. There's a long tracking shot of them going down and then turning, and he goes onto the boat. It's just a really nice shot. There's lots of, when they finally get to the sort of the thing that's apparently being turned into a solar testing center, the fort. There are lots of wonderful shots, kind of at a sideways angle, like just slightly pitched at an angle as they're running around in there to give it a bit more of a sense of claustrophobia and just make it a bit more dynamic. So I thought that the direction was good. The location work is terrific. All of the stuff with the boats and the Navy.
There's so much hardware on offer, isn't
right?
there?
Yeah. I mean, I know that this is during the Ted Heath government, but you sort of feel the cultural hangover of the white heat of technology stuff from when Harold Wilson was Labour Prime Minister, until 1970 and the election that took place. So hardware really almost like a feature itself of the Pertwee era, really. That kind of shining, just not even shining necessarily, but like lots of consoles with dials on, and the submarine work I thought was great. No, I really enjoyed it. I think thematically there's some really interesting stuff about Britain as a fading power.
Yeah.
A fading power, still has power, but a fading power, and the decadence of its elites, which is something obviously that Malcolm Hulke repeatedly gets at. And we'll dive into that a bit more. But first, fascinatingly, we had decided that we were going to do this serial, The Sea Devils, for the last episode before we went into indefinite development hell. And you told me, you didn't tell me whether you liked it or not, but you did tell me that you'd changed your opinion on it from 18 months ago to now, having rewatched it. So talk us through that.
Yeah, so, I mean, I watched this 18 months ago, and I made notes on it at the time, and I rewatched it for this, and so I've actually got two sets of notes which I looked at side by side.
Oh god, that's apologies, listeners. We're not going to run long.
No, I mean it's amazing that actually the individual sort of scenes and things that I picked out were exactly the same. 18 months ago, I really I didn't like this very much. I thought it was quite dull and procedural, and I also thought that, and I mean because regular listeners will know, we yield to no one in our admiration of the Pertwee era. I mean, it's possibly the era of the classics eras that we've had the most pleasure revisiting time and again, and just realising how like nailed on that format works. And actually, it does sort of, in your first instinct, when you've got this sort of great set of characters in the unit regulars that work really well, it's slightly discomforting to see an Earthbound story outside of that milieu. And I don't know whether...
Just to be clear, the Brigadier, Yates, all the rest of them, they're not in this
at
all.
There's no unit at all, other than at the end of the phone.
But the sort of get-out-of-jail-free card of the Brigadier dealing with the Ministry fellow and that, it's not there, is it?
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's like 18 months ago, I really felt that it was like, it was singing all the hits of the Pertwee era. You know, you had the hardware chases. Go on.
Do your Eric Morecambe. Go on. All the right notes.
All the right notes. But I don't know. She's just like the old tunes didn't seem to be working. But that said, it's like, and it's interesting. I came to it. I watched it again yesterday, and completely changed my mind. 18 short months later, I loved it. I mean, I think it is. I think it suffers from being it's a much more linear story than the than the Silurians. It's a lot less interesting. The Sea Devils themselves are a much duller foe because they, for two reasons. One, they have a much less sophisticated society and internal dynamic, which, when you're telling a story, the reason why the Silurians work so well for telling a story about, you know, the original inhabitants of Earth is that they've evolved this culture that has a lot of internal conflict, and you know, you've got those power dynamics between the old Silurian and the young Silurian, and you know, they've almost evolved along a parallel path to man. And yet we're seeing them as the monsters, but they're the original.
I mean, you really get into the politics of it.
You really get into the politics of it, and then so that tussle over who has a claim to be the dominant species on Earth is,
whereas the political debate in the Sea Devils culture appears to be in the head of one quite cantankerous chief.
Yes,
with a quite changeable set of
but they're also
peace war.
They're also there largely as the master's henchmen. And I think that the master, I mean,
although his game plan is never really that clear. Like, it's what does he think they're going to do when he's helped them? And it's all a bit weird. I mean, he's a serial offender in this particular case, in this particular thing. But
that's the thing, because I love the Delgado Master, obviously, but he is such a sort of linear black and white character. You know, he's a cartoon character essentially. He just comes from this idea that the Doctor needed a Moriarty. And so that kind of drains any potential for interesting conflict out of it, because the master's just not interesting enough to deliver that. But the thing that I was sort of riveted by this time round, which I'd sort of picked up on in my notes, but it's almost like it suffuses this whole story like a blanket, is the end of Empire.
Focus on people eating the sandwiches?
Yeah, the constant sandwich eating.
No, but sorry, I interrupted your point, and it's a good one, and I agree, so sorry.
It's like, the end of Empire is written all over this. Like, it's absolutely shot through almost everywhere on this. So you have Colonel Trenchard, and there's the great sort of bit where the Master says, "Oh, he used to run a colony."
Yeah,
and they say, "Yeah, quite a small one," and they declared independence shortly after he arrived. But he's this slightly, pathetic functionary who was elevated above his station during the Empire, is now sort of slumming it as the prison guard at this prison that has one
prison governor, but
governor at a prison that has one prisoner.
Yeah, you had one job, mate.
Yeah.
One job.
And the Master, and this is where the Master is an interesting character in this. The Master is able to play on that. The Master's always like, "Yeah, soon you'll be back to where you deserve to be, Trenchard." He as he is in the Demons when he's playing on the religious fears of all the locals.
Oh yeah,
he's really good.
Village morality, yeah.
He's really good at playing the sort of vanities and weaknesses of the people around him, which is a sort of really interesting touch.
Although Trenchard's a pretty easy mark.
Yeah, it's not difficult,
but a fascinating one. He's in that. This era gives you quite a lot. I mean, Walker appears later on, the parliamentary private secretary. But this era, I was thinking Lupton in Planet of the Spiders, you get a lot of these weak, but still kind of... they're able to command a certain amount of power and cause a certain amount of chaos, but ultimately their power comes from their weakness.
Yeah.
Anyway, like their chaotic force comes from their weakness. The bad decisions, the actions they take, come from their weakness. They're able to get away with it because basically they're men. I mean, one of the things it's I don't want to overstate the progressive gender politics of the Sea Devils, but it is very deliberately played that Blythe, who's the captain's secretary, she is competent and knows what's going on and immediately has her sympathies in the right place with the Doctor and Joe, and she's constantly belittled, particularly by Walker, like, get me sandwiches, get me tea, all the rest of it.
And that's played like...
And even with the captain, actually, like, she respects him, but...
She bristles.
Yeah, and rightly so. So that's quite an interesting thing as well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that whole sequence where Walker turns up and starts immediately patronising her, and then there's that really grim sort of close-up on his mouth, his sort of slightly wet, toasty mouth, where
this
he
is where
says,
I again go to the
"Murder,
direction.
war always is, my dear." Sort of jolly way. It's like, but that whole sequence where he's ordering her around, she's visibly bristling at it, is played so distinctly and so deliberately. But
that was a really good directorial choice, by the way. That kind of going into the. It reminds me a little bit of. I think it's in the Lord of the Rings, the Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings film, The Return of the King, where Denethor, who is I think it's Denethor. So passes Denethor, son of Ecthelion. But there's a famous scene where he's biting into a cherry tomato, I think, and it spits out really disgustingly as he has sent some boys to their death, knowing that it's a futile mission. I drew a parallel with that. I don't know what Peter Jackson is, I believe, a Doctor Who fan.
Yeah, I think so.
So he may well have lent on
taken inspiration from the work of Michael Bryan. Well, why not?
But
I heard it here first.
When we're talking about inspirations that have come from Doctor Who, my God, I was thinking The Spy Who Loved Me is basically like, ships being stolen and submarines being stolen. Indeed, even the opening segment of the naval officers and the ship shakes and then the ship is kind of stolen and taken away. I mean, they nicked that for the beginning of the Spy Who Loved Me. And again, there's a scene very similar to that in Tomorrow Never Dies in I think 97, 98. So, there's something very Bondian. I mean, people always talk about this very glam era, very action era of Pertwee having those kind of Bond characteristics. But it was just sort of interesting to see it the other way around, where maybe the Bond makers had picked up a couple of ideas from this as well.
Well, but it's not glam, and that's the thing. Is like, I mean, even beyond the sort of the sort of impotence, the ambitious imperial impotence of characters like Trenchard and Walker. You've just got these decaying relics of so the abandoned fort that's being turned into a sonar base.
Was it sonar?
Yeah,
not solar. I thought this was it's a little bit too early for the energy crisis, isn't it?
Yeah.
So yeah,
and there's something quite pointed at the fact that even that it's it's at sea as well, and Britain is losing ships to an unknown force. Like here, Britannia does not rule the waves. It's really struggling to keep on top of a very difficult situation. So, and then there's these other sort of references to modernity that really sit the show in the now. So that when the Master asks for a colour television for the bedroom, that he must have the latest trinket, which obviously that would be, a lot of people would have been watching this on black and white TVs when this went out. And I think that's really deliberate, like between this sort of decaying, like physical and also personnel infrastructure of Empire versus the new, with the technology and the color TV and and the Doctor's various gadgets that go ping. And actually, having thought 18 months ago that the lack of the unit regulars sort of let the side down a bit here. Actually, that lack of coziness, I think, brings that sense of just decay and torpor and like just the degradation of Britain's former strength, really to the fore, because there's nothing comforting here at all.
No, and it's interesting because I mean, even the captain, who sort of ends up in the right place, his loyalties are so torn between his duty to people that are making obviously very wrong decisions, and the judgment in his brain and his heart, and that tension, that questioning of authority. He ultimately can't go against the authority, but that questioning of it is very much of the time. From the riots in '68 through to the development of the New Left in the late '60s and '70s. That questioning of authority. Okay, in the end, it may have just come. In the end, what's the end result of that? That evil billionaire entrepreneurs wear turtlenecks rather than ties. But, it's nonetheless the case that's kind of playing out in real time. You're looking at that. And to think that that's happening in Doctor Who, this silly show about, a hero in a blue box, it's quite something. I did want to, we haven't discussed Jo Grant yet. And she is an absolute... I mean, basically, every time the Doctor gets into trouble... She gets him out.
Yeah.
And right from, I think, episode 1, where she starts, she gets on a motorbike like Kathy Gale. She's wearing this wonderful go-getting ensemble, although with some pretty killer heels as well.
Which stays spotless throughout as well, that white suit.
Listen, she knows what she's doing. She is fabulous in this.
Oh, she's amazing.
And I just want to say as well, like that chemistry... when you see the Doctor and Jo speaking to each other, making little jokes to each other, it's such real acting. Like, you really feel the warmth and the affection when they make their little jokes to each other. I don't know how many takes they did. I'm sure it wasn't like a Kubrick film where they did thousands of them. But there's something very natural to the little jokes, the little laughs, the way they gesture at each other. Even, I was so mindful of, in Partners in Crime,
I made exactly the same note, but yeah, go on.
Well, in Partners in Crime, of course, where famously the 10th Doctor, David Tennant, and Donna Noble, played by Catherine Tate, sort of do that whole scene in mime where they're kind of talking to each other and what have you. And there's exactly the same thing that happens in this between the Doctor and Jo Grant, like twice, I think. Certainly there's one major scene with it. It's just great. I mean, it's a wonderful job.
Just to double back on what I said about the sort of coldness and the lack of comfort, that maybe the sort of the coziness, the the Britain that we're exposed to, thanks to the lack of coziness of the unit family around. There are two things that contribute to that. Also, one is it's incredibly violent. I mean, the number of sea devils that we see, and this I was a bit ambivalent about, because it's like I wasn't sure if we really needed to see that many sea devils. Just get machine gunned down. Or, I mean, literally mown down to a way that felt very at odds with the kind of stuff that we normally see in this era, but also quite on Doctor Who. I mean, I know ultimately, like with the Silurians, it's leading to a morally compromised but inevitable decision to get rid of them, essentially. But yeah, I mean, we do see a lot of sea devils being machine gunned at point blank range.
Yeah, I mean, there are two key moments of grotesque violence in this. And in episodes 5 and episode 6. Episode 5, it's almost unbearable, that scene where you see the Doctor basically he manages to negotiate the first steps towards peace and touches hands with the chief Sea Devil, and then within seconds the task force has arrived and the order has been given, and the thing, and that, I mean, the scene is just some naval artillery being blown and some shaky cameras, but to have the juxtaposition of the negotiated peace and then suddenly, that's not going to happen. It's the rug is pulled from you within seconds, and it's so grotesque. It's so, that switch from the hope to the reality is I found that quite poignant and quite well done, and also the machinery of war. You see the loading of the shell into the big gun or whatever they call it.
It's properly detailed and spelt out, including by the direction, like not just the end result, which is big gun gets fired, but the process by which that happens.
And obviously when you see machinery, it in artistic terms, it leads to a sense of like predestined or inevitability, like you were saying, Matt. It sort of draws to an inevitable but grim conclusion. The other episode of violence, as you mentioned already, is in episode 6, the gunfight and the mowing them down. I think it's artistically valid. It's just not very pleasant to watch. But I think it's artistically valid because what we're looking at really is kind of a colonizing force, humanity in this case. But it's not really humanity. It's really the British state and the collapse of empire. It's really the empire, right? Basically mowing down an indigenous insurgency, and obviously, with the Biafran War was around this period, and so on and so forth. So there was a lot of people would have been able to draw the kind of the parallels. And obviously the Biafra War, not an area I'm at all an expert about, but neither side necessarily covered themselves in glory in how that was done, and so on and so forth. As Walker says, war tends to have that. But also, like the decadent, disgusting, the vile thing, which is played quite subtly for laughs actually towards the end, but the degree to which Walker is very happy to sacrifice the lives of others to satisfy his armchair general status and project the power of Britain. But when it actually comes to himself, he's just the greenest little fuck. And, they've told us to do this, and he refuses to sort of engage in defense to the extent that he locks himself back in the cupboard.
Yeah. It's amazing that. But the other thing, the second thing that I think really makes for the chilly atmosphere is the music, which is, I mean, this is as wild and experimental as Doctor Who music gets. This is Malcolm Clarke at his most unhinged. I mean, it
reminds me of the stuff you heard in like you said, like Tomb of the Cybermen, or I know that there weren't. But
it goes further, though. It's not even just got that sort of like, there are so many bits in the Hartnell and Troughton era where you're sort of thinking, is this music or is it sort of background ambiance? Is it the planet or something like that? Whereas this, it veers between being discomforting and unsettling to just like genuinely shrill at times, which don't get me wrong, I think it's brilliant. I think
it's
this
fantastic.
is one of the all-time great Doctor Who scores, because it's absolutely wild that this is being pumped out in a primetime TV show.
It's so funny because
absolutely bonkers. It's so avant-garde, but it offers you no respite. It really turns that up.
It's fascinating, actually, that you get the. I was listening to. I was reading some article the other day. No, it was on Twitter. Who am I kidding? It was on Twitter. Someone had said, if you listen to the music track without the vocals of "Single Ladies Put a Ring on It" by Beyonce, it's fucking nuts. And it's true. And I went away and did this, and it was just like, fuck, that's really out there. It's just bleeps. It's just, and I found myself thinking, watching this, that this was really, really experimental, and the kind of the jarring, clanging and shrieking noise that was being produced really spoke to the sort of grim inevitability of where this was all going. That you couldn't find a harmonious solution through to the end of this sad story. It was, it was going to be what it was, and so the music fits that perfectly.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's a real swing, and it's like, I mean, God knows, how that must have gone over at the time, but it's incredible.
We talked about Katie Manning, of course, and how great she was as the action woman and getting the Doctor out of trouble and being such a dynamic, proactive force, not just sort of, I think, probably outside fandom these days, but I think there was certainly a feeling that Jo Grant, Katie Manning, was sort of just a kind of doe-eyed, yes, Doctor, oh my goodness, Doctor. It's so not true. As soon as you... But what I really want to say a word about Pertwee as well, who is just, I mean, we say this every time pretty much, but he inhabits that role so brilliantly. And when he's bribing the boatman,
yeah,
and he
talks about his war record,
yeah,
doesn't
Crimea, Gallipoli, El Alamein. Does it really matter? And it's just the way he does it, and it's done with such...
It's another nod though to that being the currency that should grease the wheels in that sort of setup. And again, it's the Doctor and the Master are both at it. I mean, obviously, the punchline to that sequence with the boatman is that he's, waving some cash at him, and he says, "Does it really matter?"
Yeah.
But later,
and of course, he does have comic chops. Let's not forget that John Pertwee,
no, absolutely,
was a comic actor,
and he gets his bit of moral outrage when he says, "You've made them." But you haven't killed them. You've made them very, very angry, which is obviously a great moment. But also the bit where then he says, wouldn't you rather be Walker the Peacemaker? And the Master and the Doctor are both at it here. They both recognise from a sort of anthropological point of view the sort of buttons that they need to push with these people to.
They're
get
playing
out
the
of
same game, but with very different.
Objectives. Yeah, of course, 100%. Can I also just put in a nod of recognition to Donald Sumter's performance as Captain Ridgway? Is it Captain or Commander Ridgway? Basically, the submarine guy with the beard.
Yeah, Captain
Ridgway.
Hart.
No, Ridgway, the guy on the submarine.
Oh yeah, Donald Sumter.
Yeah.
So God, he's got such a distinctive voice. I recognised his voice before I recognised it was him.
So he's in the making of documentary that's on the DVD.
No,
and he
is he?
says that he always felt uncomfortable doing the sort of histrionics of fear that Doctor Who would sometimes sort of call you to have to do. So he developed this idea that when the shit's really hitting the fan on the submarine, he just does that twitchy eye thing, which is so good. So the bit where he's listening to the screams coming down the earpiece.
It's a good bit of theatre acting. I'm not sure it's a good piece of screen acting because it's pulled in for a really tight close-up. And the twitch is...
I mean, you can't miss it. It's not subtle. But
no.
I really like it. I think it's an attempt to do something a bit different with that kind of role.
It's a very good idea, slightly poorly executed. And it reminds me, famously, the...
Work for me.
famously the Michael Caine screen acting masterclass, which is ripped off so brilliantly by Peter Serafinovich and so on. But he talks a lot about that, how you have to vary your acting in the master shot versus the close up. How in the master shot you can do it more like you're on the theatre because it needs to be picked up, whereas in close you need to make a tiny movement because it's going to be. And I think that it's a great idea, and I think it's just way over the top. Because with that tight close-up, he's more or less like, waggling his face. But I did think he was good, and I did like the way he just shot the Sea Devil when they went in, and the Doctor did his typical thing of saying, you didn't have to do that. He's a military man, and he's getting his boat back. Of course he's going to do that. And I thought that he played the commander very tightly, very, very, he had that kind of buttoned-up imperial kind of demeanor that you would expect of someone in that position.
So, just to maybe round up on the Sea Devils, let's look at our Pertwee era bingo card. Obviously, you've got the charming repartee with Katie Manning, tick. You've got the moment of moral outrage, tick. You've got the name dropping of a historical figure. He was a close personal friend of mine.
Yes.
The hardware chase at the end on the, what are they like? They're not jet skis, are they?
They're sort of
tiny little boats,
tiny little jet boat things. Yeah,
great stunt work.
Poor Roger Delgado and John Pertwee actually having to go in the sea in those diving costumes.
And by all accounts, Roger Delgado couldn't swim and found it genuinely terrifying.
I mean, that story checks out. Yeah,
absolutely nuts. I've got to say, the sword fight is absolutely ridiculous. And the fact that, what prison is leaving a full rack of swords nearby? But also, the fact that then the whole thing gets recapped at the start of episode 3, having seen it at the end of episode 2, did make me think that at that point they might have been combing it a little bit thin. But I don't know. Were you
fucking
wowed?
Loved the sword fight. They should have more of them.
There we go.
Well, on that note,
more sword fights to follow. So we're a thumbs up on the Sea Devils.
2 thumbs up. Siskel and Ebert.
John had been in the Navy for about 4 or 5 years, practically the whole of the war.
He had a lot of stories about his time in the Navy. He'd gone out for a drink with the lads one night in Portsmouth and woke up next morning with a tattoo. That was a very John Pertwee kind of story.
So, what's next on the docket tonight?
Matt, you've painstakingly organised and prepared this podcast. You know exactly what you wrote an intro. I think you're just trying to avoid discussion. You're trying to prolong the period where we're not discussing Legend of the Sea Devils.
Legend of the Sea Devils.
Which is obviously a 13th Doctor story, and was broadcast on the 17th of April 2022. And I joked earlier that there was an innovation that we were only doing 2 stories instead of 3, but actually there's a further innovation, which is that we are going to be discussing more recent Who.
And more specifically, breaking the Earth for the first time on the Chris Chibnall era.
Yes.
What treasures will we find?
That's right, but we are here to discuss Legend of the Sea Devils, and before this turns into the inevitable wider examination of the Chibnall era, let's try to take it on its own.
Yeah,
merits.
What happens in this story, John?
Well, there's a stone sea devil that gets smashed to bits by a lady, and all hell ensues.
If that doesn't paint a complex mental picture in your mind, I don't know what will.
That's more or less it.
That is more or less it.
And then there's lots of sort of sub-Pirates of the Caribbean daring do, where they go from one place to another. There's a ghost ship that's manned by... that's crewed, by sea devils, and a plan to sort of make Earth uninhabitable for humans. If they waited just a couple hundred years more, the humans would have done that for themselves. But yeah, that's more or less it. And the Doctor has to stop the Sea Devils from from achieving their ends.
And crucially, this being our Sea Devil special, this is the first time the Sea Devils have appeared in the modern series since we saw them in The Sea Devils. They obviously appeared in 1984's Warriors of the Deep, which we reviewed back in...
Warriors
what
on the cheap.
What a classic. We reviewed that back in 2017, so you can dial a little further back in your podcatcher and find out what we thought about that.
Yep.
But otherwise then, nothing until last year.
Was it worth the wait, Matt?
So...
can I just say, before you answer that,
I'll gather myself.
We were munching on a pizza, not the same one, not like the two dogs in Lady in the Tramp, sort of connected by pizza to our lips met. Now, not like that, but we were munching on a pizza, and we were sort of discussing, like, well, when we get to Legend of the Sea Devil, should we front up about what we think about the Chibnall era, or should we, try to discuss the story as a story before we get there? And I was very much of the view that we should discuss the story as a story before we get there, because I thought that it showed, that it showed our commitment to this as being the Sea Devils episode, and we would talk about the Sea Devils, and then we talk about how the Sea Devils are evolved. But I feel that in that decision, I've shown considerable more respect to the Sea Devils than Chris Chibnall did. Matt?
I thought this was all right.
Oh, Matt! Come on! It's a stinker! Ooh.
I mean,
what a pile. Come on.
We've snarked in passing on the Chibnall era as it was unfolding a few years ago when we were recording these episodes, our previous run. And yeah, I mean, it's no great shakes, this, but I expected to hate it, and I thought it passed 45 minutes reasonably okay. I also think it dodged, it swerved. So basically...
It is set in China.
It is set in China.
And it manages to avoid the pitfalls of having Chinese characters that have previously...
It doesn't do a challenge of Weng Chiang.
It doesn't, no. And broadly speaking, it's not clumsy about them being there. Not entirely convinced by the Doctor's silk sort of Chinese get up, but I'm not suggesting it's offensive in any way. I just didn't think it was very pleasant. It's not like the Third Doctor. Nice threads, Pertwee. Not convinced by that. But no, obviously no issues there. Was it an interesting setting? Did they make the most of the fact that they were? I mean, obviously it wasn't a film.
Oh no, of course not.
Right.
Okay. No, and as I say, we are. I didn't want to preface this with doing a long sort of explanation of what my wider reservations about the Chris Chibnall era were, and then get to the episode after 20 minutes.
We simply don't have the time.
Big picture exposition. No, we don't. But broadly, like my elevator summary of the Chibnall era is that, like, I think everyone is putting in a hell of a shift, but it all completely fails because of the words on the page are terrible. I think Chris Chibnall is an absolutely disastrous writer, and I think everything has this kind of first draft, both not just in terms of like the lack of plot logic that his stories kind of revolve around, and the terrible pacing and the like awful gobs of exposition he puts into things, but even just like sentences that aren't actually sentences. I mean, it's literally the words and the order in which he writes them are wrong. And one of the reasons, this is a co-write with Ella Road, who gets top billing over Chris Chibnall on this. And like, I think a lot of the guest written episodes of this era, it's not as badly written as some of the Chris Chibnall solo writes. There are a couple of jokes in this that actually made me laugh. Like, I liked the bit where Dan was looking up at the stars on Madame Ching's ship, and he says, I always thought I'd like to learn the constellations, and then I just downloaded an app on my phone. And stuff like that just sort of made me laugh. And it didn't quite...
That made you laugh?
I mean, it's all relative. I don't think this is very good.
I made a note, Matt.
I expected to hate this and didn't.
This was guilty of. I'll grant you there were jokes, or at least language in the shape of jokes.
It's a solid 5 out of 10. I don't want to get. I don't want to get pinned down to the point where I'm saying this is a masterpiece. But it's surrounded by almost unwatchable Doctor Who in terms of this run. So we are talking about the broader Chibnall era. I think this is terrible. I think this is some of the worst Doctor Who that's ever been made in this 3 or 2.5 years or whatever it is that it all adds up to.
But
I don't think this is the lowest ebb. That was a pleasant surprise because I was not looking forward to watching this.
Well, no, and indeed, this was literally the first time you'd watched it, right?
It was, because, I mean, this is, in terms of getting to a low ebb... Which
kind of says it all, really. You didn't bother to check it out at the time.
The big Easter special from last year, it passed me by at the time, and I didn't bother to watch it. I'd sort of earmarked that we might want to do it on the podcast with the Sea Devils at some point, so that's my excuse for not having watched it. But no, I skipped straight to Power of the Doctor. And
well, now you probably understand why I'm so angry, because I did watch it at the time, so I've been forced to watch it twice.
Ooh.
So, well,
I'm not sure if I'll watch it again.
No. Whereas I've had to, and believe me, that leaves a deep, irreparable scarring. No, I think one of the worst things about this, and
I don't have a huge amount to say about this, other than the fact that I thought it looked pretty nice. It read like it had at least gone to a second draft, which I think you can't say for some of the Chibnall solo rights.
Fair.
There was some decent performances in it. I
really?
think.
From whom? I don't mean to.
I feel like I'm being put on the defensive here.
I thought Arthur Lee as Ji Hun was good.
Yes, I thought
he was far and
good.
away the best thing in it. In fact,
I actually thought the final scene with. I thought Jodie Whittaker's final scene on the beach, where, I mean, problematic as that is, which I'm sure we'll get to, where she's actually able to.
I'm not sure it's that problematic.
Do something.
Well, a lot of people think so, but we'll get to that.
Yeah. Where the Doctor's actually able to do something that has an emotional layer to it, other than just go around reeling off exposition at 1,000,000 miles an hour. I thought that was one of Jodie Whittaker's sort of better. I mean, Jodie Whittaker is a good actress, and she has been served, a 3-year or 3-series long shit sandwich, really, in terms of what she's had to try and deliver, I think.
Yeah.
So that scene at the end, I thought, oh yeah, she's actually pretty good.
Those non-bread sandwiches you can buy if you're worried about your weight.
Mm.
It's that, but it's just shit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, and it looks like all the stuff at the ocean, with those sort of burnt sky, but a lot of CGI oceans, obviously. But I thought that looked really nice.
That is setting the bar low. Oh, I like the CGI ocean. That was good, wasn't it?
No, but John, how the bar is so low. The bar couldn't be any lower.
No.
I mean, it's like
they've had to dig a trench for the bar.
Yeah, and it's sort of like it's weird that we're kind of getting into talking about just how bad I think this run of Doctor Who is on an episode that I thought was sort of
not the worst,
pleasantly but I was pleasantly surprised by. Which then, I don't know if this makes it more or less interesting for the listeners. I'm in the weird position of sort of trying to be quite positive about it. And the bar is so low for this era, unbelievely low.
Yeah.
And I
provocatively low.
I thought it cleared it. But seeing as your views on the episode and the era are largely aligned, talk me through it.
So, it's just an absolute mess. From it's a kids show, and there's going to be action and take you from place to place, and to a certain extent, look again, like you were saying, Doctor Who has seldom looked better, right? You don't necessarily if you think about the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise, which, by the way, this is a pretty fucking solid rip-off of. They spend hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. And basically the effects work here looked great, as good as, fine, whatever. So what you're looking at is fine. Gotta say, I suspect that there's a kind of COVID impact thing, but there was something very...
Oh yeah, there is. That's also the other thing, which is my big sort of note on Flux as well, is that all of this is being done through lockdown, which, as someone who made television during the COVID era, especially where the rules were changing, daily, the fact that the fact that the tail end of the Chibnall era looks as good as it does is nothing short of a miracle. Because I watched episodes of Called the Midwife that were clearly shot in lockdown and with actors who were clearly not in the same room on the same day at different times, and you felt it. I thought I was like watching an episode of MasterChef at one point. So it's a miracle that this got made during COVID. But again, this comes out to my point. I think everyone, on a technical level especially, is putting in a real shift to bring this to the screen, but they're generally let down by the words, which I didn't think were as bad as they normally were this time.
And again, credit has to be given to Chibnall for bringing new talent in to the one area. I think we agree on this. The one area where I think there was an unalloyed good of what he was doing was bringing different talent, particularly behind the camera. Writers and also producers, directors. Not
being afraid to give sort of writers and directors like a first time gig. That was always the not the excuse. I don't think anyone ever really pinned sort of Davis or Moffat, down on the record about this. But there's always this assumption that it's such a big, complicated gig, Doctor Who, you can't hand it to a first timer, and he did. Hao Lu Wang only has one other TV credit to her,
and it's still not been shown yet, right?
Yeah, it's Bodies on Netflix
coming up soon.
So this might well be her TV debut, and it looks great.
No, and again, it does look great. I do think there are a couple of bits that are shonky. Just like, as I say, I know it's COVID impacted, but even though there are those people who get killed in the village, and it's explained away that she doesn't have a crew. Again, it's more in the script really than in the direction, but it does feel rather weightless. The lack of people.
Well, I think it's both.
Ship.
I think it's the lack of people, but also, and again, the way that Chibnall scripts work there's a setup, the pieces are shuffled around a bit, and then it's resolved by the Doctor talking a lot and pressing some buttons or plugging some wires together.
I mean, to be fair, that's a lot of Doctor Who. I don't necessarily want to single out poor Chibbers for that.
No, but also then that's the thing, isn't it? It's like,
I think the main reason it is a bit of a mess, right? They break the statue. Why was the Sea Devil turned into a statue? Well, it's explained later on that Ji-Hun's second in command was able to somehow capture it using a thingamajig. There's a lot of kind of MacGuffin boondoggles in this. There's a shiny stone. There's the piece of stone map that Madame Chang gets hold of. There's all those cylinders with bubbles going up and down them, which is I don't know. It's there's a ghost ship. It's just it all feels a bit much, right? And it's not really in service of a story. It's basically the dialogue is there to connect certain set pieces, but it's not really there to tell you a story. And indeed, it's actually when those set pieces...
It's just shuffling the pieces on the board. It's like...
Yeah, and when those set pieces are all done and dusted, there are two genuinely nice moments. The first is at the end. The first nice moment is at the end. The first nice moment is when they're all on the deck having finished it all up, right? And the Doctor says, we're just a crew looking for adventure and often finding it. And it's a really nothing line. It's a simple, it's almost like a little slogan, just our job, ma'am. But she delivers it so beautifully, and she delivers it with none of that manic Jane fucking Horrocks. Or Sue Pollard even. And it's like, oh my god, I've got to go here. I've got a sonic screwdriver. It's just she's given the character, she's given herself I don't know, it's not really there in the script even, but she's given herself time to breathe.
Mm.
The chemistry between Jodie Whittaker as the 13th Doctor and Mandip Gill as Yasmin Khan is real, and obviously it's well known that they got on famously and became very close friends. The chemistry is great, and the longing, Mandip Gill, I mean, I've never understood why Chibnall cast her as a 19-year-old in the first episode.
Yes.
When A, she clearly looks much older, and B, it sort of does get a bit icky that she's... Thankfully, everyone forgets that after the first episode, after the first episode of this era. But she's meant to be 19. Also a serving police officer at 19. I mean, fair dues, you can do it, but it's all a bit strange. And then, obviously it becomes a bit icky when you got the 1,000,000,000-year-old Doctor and the 19-year-old. And that, by the way, is, I think, the get-out-of-jail-free card for the sort of... the accusation of queer baiting. But on the and so I suppose in that sense it's not problematic because you can kind of explain that. I mean, there was some conductor, I can't remember her name, so I really apologise, but there was a conductor who was complaining, a female conductor who was complaining recently that the character of Lydia Tarr in the new film Tar starring Cate Blanchett is an unsympathetic character, and that's such a shame for the world of female conductors. And, especially in the wake of Me Too. And there's a Me Too film about a female conductor, and I haven't seen it, but, I've read also reviews suggesting that's quite a reductive view about what the film is. But, you got the Me Too drama about a female conductor, and it turns her into the monster, and what a missed opportunity that is to make a point about this, that, and the other. And I read a review, I think it was in The Guardian, I forget who it was saying, but art can and has the right to confound. And I suspect that Chibnall would argue that it may be, wouldn't be appropriate. He is after all a creature of watching 80s Doctor Who, no hanky-panky in the TARDIS. Maybe he feels that that's kind of explicable. So you can sort of squint to get away with it. The problem, I think, with the Tasmin thing, the supposed sort of romantic tension between the two of them, is that it's not really earned in the previous 3 seasons, right?
No, I mean, and that is the thing. I mean, Chibnall's fronted up about the fact that it was never his intention to do that, but people started responding positively to the obvious chemistry between Jodie Whittaker and Mandip Gill, and he decided to allude to it in the script. But again, it's something that... And
I don't think it's coming from a bad place, but he just doesn't have the chops to really land it.
Or just to go for it and have them kiss, which frankly, I mean, it's like... I'd been absolutely fine with that.
Well, me too, absolutely.
Like, all the male doctors get to kiss people. Why shouldn't the 13th?
No, and that I think is where the argument gets a bit more.
This is also the thing, though, that just like big picture, he does these things, but he doesn't know what to do with any of them. And this is broadly like, I mean, I think that a lot of the stuff that Chibnall did as a producer, getting fresh talent in, really pushing the diversity, behind the camera as well. First female Doctor, which, long overdue in my view. Now to the point where, like, if another woman is cast as Doctor Who, in future, it just won't be a thing. You successfully proved that you could do that. But all of these things are, I think, just approached as to-do lists, almost like tick box items, just to say, right, I wanted to do that and I've done it. And there's no, and it would have been the same if he'd cast a man as Doctor Who, because he's got no understanding of like what the character is for, other than just to turn up and say, I'm the Doctor, and do stuff. And in the way that, Davis gives you, the survivor's guilt of the 9th Doctor and the sort of lonely god of the 10th Doctor, and Moffat's got incredibly clear reads on whatever your mileage on the timey-wimey stuff is, that
No,
idea
sure, but
that the Doctor is a person who lives a very, very complicated life because of his lifestyle, which constantly trips him up. Whereas the Doctor is the Doctor here because she is a person who
she's the hero in the blue box.
She's the hero in the blue box, and that's it.
Heroine.
There's nothing else. Which is also why I appreciate, like, in that final scene on the beach in this, where it slows down enough, and like you say,
that's
there's
my
none
second,
of the sort of the manic exposition.
I was saying there are two moments.
Yeah.
That there's the moment where they take a beat on the deck of the boat, and then there's the moment where they sit together. Mandip Gill and
it works, and I buy it, and because you see the Doctor allowed to have some actual emotional vulnerability,
and because it's slowed down, the actors can bring something to it that the script doesn't, right?
Yeah.
In much the same way that in Trial of a Time Lord, you've got the Sixth Doctor and Perry. It's not really on the. It's not. It really isn't. It's not. It's not really. It really isn't on the page that they've developed a warmer relationship. But by God, Colin Baker and blimey,
Nicola Bryant.
Yes, Nicola Bryant. How can I forget? They've obviously worked together and decided, we're going to sell the chemistry and the friendship that we have. And I think it's a bit similar here in the sense that. It's not really earned in terms of the writing, but there is at least the space for the actors to act and not just sort of react to the latest whiz bang. And if you compare this to the Sea Devils, okay, you've got 6 episodes, so there's a bit more time to play with. A lot more time to play with.
Days longer to play
with. And indeed, episode 4 of that, I should have mentioned earlier, really fucking drags. But nonetheless, Russell T Davies, even Moffat at his best, showed with great skill how in 45, 48 minutes you could have that light and shade and the fast and the movement, and Davies's ability to make you feel full empathy with a character that says 2 or 3 lines. It's a real gift, and Chibnall just doesn't have it. And I don't really know what Madame Chang's what's she there for? She's sort of...
Well, again, it's another...
historical figure, right.
Yeah, but historical figure, yeah.
But it's another tick box exercise. It's not like, as in, oh, well, we've got a historical figure. It's a female pirate. That's interesting. Yes, of course it's interesting, but we don't really... It's not about her. It should be about her, right? And the Sea Devils, again, they're just sort of... Hey, I love the Sea Devils. Let's have the Sea Devils. Yeah, what if they were pirates? It's like, well, okay, but like, what? Yeah. And then there's really just stupid stuff, like, when Dan and the other fellow whose dad dies I can't even bother to look it up. They see Madame Chang's boat sailing off. It's practically the fucking horizon, and they say, oh yeah, let's swim to it. I mean, again, like. That's just it's a tiny thing, but like you're the showrunner. Okay, if the CGI has accidentally put it at the horizon, you have to go back and say, mate, my script says they swim to the boat. It's got to be basically still in the harbour. But no. It's like it's basically five miles away already. They swim to it.
Yeah. No,
I got really pissed off about that.
No, but you're right. It's extraordinary that like just the basic. And there are actually fewer in this.
You can't
episode,
swim to a boat that's sailing away, Matt.
There are so many.
You can't.
I guess what Ella Road brought to the table in terms of whatever her, I don't know how this was co-written, but whatever she brought to the table was made absolutely self-evident in the trailer for The Power of the Doctor that comes into this. It comes at the end of this,
which is the king of all tick box exercises.
Ace, but where
Tegan,
where Tegan says, "Ace, I haven't heard from the Doctor for 4 decades, just because it's been 3 decades for me."
Says
Ace, which is 2 sentences that turned up in the script that not only got filmed and included in the episode, but were then put in the trailer. I mean, it's like, those are just... I mean, it's not even the case where you say, like, you know, oh, is this what the characters have said? Those are bad sentences. They are bad sentences, John. In order to, like, two people having a conversation about how they haven't heard from the Doctor for ages, and those are the two sentences that he uses for it. And... as I say, it's like, the way I would say is, like, if I'm being generous, I think this is a solid 5 out of 10, is because it lacks bad sentences like that, where you go, why did you put those words in the page in that order? I mean, it's like, it's unbelievable. And also, you know, if we're talking more broadly, this is also what some of the, in terms of, like, cast and crew pulling a shift and then being let down by what Chibnall gives them to do. You also see it in, like, some of the guest write episodes of this era absolutely sing, particularly in the first series where you've got the Rosa Parks episode and the Partition episode, both of which...
Demons of the Punjab, I think, is... Yeah, I mean, I guess we'll get to it, so I shouldn't...
Obviously we'll
spoilers,
get to it. But, you know, but
that's great.
I think they're two, like, all-timers for Doctor Who, and they sit in this era, like, alongside episodes where just the words on the page are bad. And it's like, and no one said, is there a better way of phrasing this? I don't know. So it's like,
it also, the reason I think, you know, because I was talking about...
There are fewer bad sentences.
No, I do hear what you're saying, and I concede that point. But I think that, you know, when I was thinking about, is it the COVID restrictions that have somehow... Of course, like, if there weren't COVID restrictions, Madame Chang would
It's also all being done on a green screen with social distancing, so it feels oddly airless.
It does, but but it's not just about that. I think, like, it looks fine, right? It looks fine. I was thinking, why does it feel so depopulated? Even though, and I actually came to the conclusion it wasn't so much the COVID restrictions; it was that the characters didn't actually inhabit the people that were playing them. So it feels like there are fewer people there. Like John Bishop is a genial presence, but he's just sort of there. Like the Dan character has no need to be there, and again, it's sort of it's very royally amusing, and I'm scarcely the first to have made the point, but there's that famous footage of Chris Chibnall as a kind of adolescent berating the quality of mid-80s Doctor Who. An era which was often criticised, particularly in the Fifth Doctor era, as having a sort of a wonky, overfilled TARDIS team with characters that were left not doing very much. I mean, he's got two companions, and one of them basically doesn't need to be there. And it's not John Bishop's fault. Mandip Gill and Jodie Whittaker have great chemistry. It's not their fault. I do think that Crystal Yu as Madame Chang, with the greatest respect.
So we should say it's Madame Ching, isn't it? Which is
Ching.
Yes.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
That's all right.
Well, that just shows you. I mean, I can't even remember the name of the other character. Ji Hun, I thought was good, played by Arthur Lee.
Yeah, he's very good.
Madame Ching, sorry, forgive me. Madame Ching, yeah, I thought that Crystal Yu was bad. I thought that but again, even when the others go above their performance, I can scarcely criticise her because there wasn't really much on the page for her to do anything with. I mean, you were meant to feel that she had this connection to these two children that she was getting, but it wasn't on the page. It wasn't written there. There wasn't even a flashback to two kids being torn away from their mother's arms or something. I don't know. It's like enough money was spent that could have been done. You know, get a couple of kids, put them in a smock, have them cry as they run away. You know, job done. But they don't even bother with that. They don't do anything that kind of assists the dramatic tension that you would want to feel in a situation like that. Oh, really? You've got some kids? Okay. Well, I mean, after you... And then there's the guy... What is his name? I'm going to look it up because it's bothering me now that I don't know. But like Ying Wai, played by David C. The kid, right? So she doesn't really... So Madame Ching doesn't actually kill his dad, but she's responsible for his death. And then this other guy says, oh, yeah, well, I really respect her. I'll shack up with her. Again, it just doesn't... it doesn't ring right, does it? It doesn't really ring true. So if you don't believe in the characters, that's why they feel airless. That's why they don't feel like they're there, and that's why it feels so depopulated. I mean, you consider, all the stuff that Malcolm Hulke was writing for the Sea Devils.
Yeah,
where
I mean,
you just had character actors. And we're not talking about, they're sketches of people, but it's a bit like Russell T Davies again is very good at this. A sketch of a person, your brain can fill in the rest of it because there are the little tells about what they are. Chibnall's just not capable of that, and that's why you don't care about the characters, and that's why it feels like there's fewer of them there than actors that are on the screen.
I mean, that's the thing. When you look at the failure of an era, or eras that don't work, to greater or lesser extent, and we look at the classic series, and there are so many sort of layers to pull apart. You look at something like the John Nathan Turner era and think, okay, well, why is a lot of this not very good? And there are all sorts of like interlaid, the mechanics of how television was made, the support from the BBC, the commissioning process, the interpersonal, the torturous dramas between Nathan Turner and Saywood, and all of these kind of things. It's like there's a lot to pull apart there to sort of diagnose what's gone wrong. And I think with this era, it's so much simpler. It's the words on the page. These are bad scripts. And so I was just momentarily relieved that this was slightly less bad, I think.
I can't wear this puffy shirt on TV. I mean, look at it. It looks ridiculous.
Well, you gotta wear it now. All those stores are stocking it based on the condition that you're gonna wear this on the TV show. The factory in New Jersey is already making them.
They're making these?
Yes. This pirate trend that she's come up with, Jerry, this is going to be the new look for the 90s. You're going to be the first pirate.
But I don't want to be a pirate.
So, move towards the end of Season 3, Episode 1 of I'll Explain Later.
It's already been emotional.
It has been emotional. But yes, what we thought is, obviously we're only reviewing only. So this is a free service. We're not charging you for this. We're reviewing 2 episodes.
We should be paying people to listen to this.
2 stories per episode now, but we thought we'd give you a little bit of added value at the end by having a question of the week. Let's see.
It's a bit like TV burp, isn't it?
Let's see.
I'll explain later's question of the week.
Well, let's see if this format point makes it into the next series. But
or indeed the next episode.
But anyway, in light of, and obviously there are plenty more Chris Chibnall episodes to follow, John, where we can discuss his strengths and weaknesses in more detail. But in a nod to the fact that, one of the things that I think he attempted to do well, which was to slightly broaden the scope of the show's historical settings beyond being Shakespeare, Churchill, Charles Dickens, the celebrities of the British historical, to move it into a new eras and periods, so obviously 19th century China here, and, but it's happened, across the Whittaker era. I asked you, which period of world history that Doctor Who has not yet visited would you like to visit in Doctor Who, not personally, and which classic Doctor Who monster would pitch up there? What did you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, and I thought this was a. We already mentioned, I think, that I'm less bullish on Rosa than you are, but I do think that Demons of the Punjab is outstanding, and in both cases, certainly going to. Not really shrinking away from quite challenging subject matter in going to both those situations, Rosa Parks and Partition, which is, the partition of the Indian subcontinent is in the late 40s is not, it has to be said, widely understood as full of bloodshed as it was in this country. I think there is a kind of myth that freedom was handed to the Indian subcontinent without a shot being fired or blood being spilled, and it's a very curious thing that vision should take hold when it was so very far from being the case. So I give Chibnall a lot of credit for wanting to go down that road and and basically do a proper Reithian thing of inform, educate, and entertain. So, I gave this some thought, and it was really interesting because I happen to live near the Tower Theatre in Stoke Newington, confirming most of the prejudices, I dare say,
I was going to say,
of those listening to this podcast. But despite that, despite my proximity to it, I wouldn't want anyone to think badly of the Tower Theatre Company in Stoke Newington. But their season that's coming up includes Our Country's Good by Timberlake Burton Baker. Now, that is a play about the first British convicts arriving in being transported to Australia. And again, it touches on a lot of those kind of colonial and indeed post-colonial, because when it was written and the themes that it was actually exploring, even though it's historically set. But it's a really interesting period, and it deals with a lot of colonial and post-colonial thought, and obviously there's the interaction with the Aboriginal people. And I thought that would be a particularly rich setting for the Doctor to end
meet
up
the
in.
Crotons again.
I was thinking that I think the Sontarans would be quite good there, because you've got a colonising force in the British, and they realise they're about to be trumped. It's a bit. I grant you, it's a bit Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, with the Vogons turning up to demolish the planet after the council had just tried to demolish the house. But I thought it'd be quite interesting to have one imperialist force sort of finding themselves outdone by another. So that was what I thought about it.
Good answer.
Matt?
So I watched the film from, I think it was 1968 the other night, first of a trilogy of films, the Yokai Monsters trilogy from late 60s Japan, which is sort of a trilogy of it. I only watched the first film, 100 Monsters, which eventually, after some time, does deliver on its title of giving you 100 mythical monsters or yokai in feudal era Japan. And so what I thought was, I believe the year, I'm just going to consult my notes here, so 1543, feudal era Japan, when the first Portuguese trading ships are blown off course and turn up, and that's the start of what is actually quite a long process of Japan opening to the West. But I was sort of interested to see how kind of classic Doctor Who monsters might play in a culture that has sort of very different ideas of like sort of monsters and spirits and things like that. And then I actually thought, well, what if one of the people on the Portuguese trading ships is the meddling monk, and he turns up with a load of macra, because there are already some really big crabs in Japan anyway. So yes, I'm saying meddling monk. Someone on Twitter was saying that Matt Berry should play the meddling monk, and I think that is absolutely spot on. So meddling monk, as played by Matt Berry, turns up in Japan 1543 with a load of macra, and chaos ensues.
Yeah.
There you go.
But
I'm day stamping that now, so if it turns up in Davis's next run.
They're sure as hell as a nation that knows what to do with seafood, though. So I'm
100%.
I'm sure they could whip up something really nice with those macra.
And do we have any? I believe we have some correspondence on this matter.
We do. Big thank you to regular listener and
occasional erstwhile contributor,
erstwhile and future. He's very happy to come back. We're less happy to have him back, but a psephologist, political guru Lewis Baston, very very big friend of the podcast, and he thought that. He came up with a location with several possible time periods. So he was
to be clear, he rang you to give you this information as well, didn't he?
He did ring me in addition to this, yeah. But he also sent me some notes, because he knows me well enough to know that I wouldn't have been able to capture all of that. No, I wouldn't have listened. I was probably cooking some pasta or something at the same time. I was indeed doing that. So he sent me some notes, bless him, knowing me as he does. So he said basically he was thinking sort of Istanbul, Constantinople. Right, because and in his words, it was an order of magnitude bigger and more opulent and dramatic and dangerous than anywhere else in Europe or the Middle East for a very long time. So possible periods that you could go to: the Fourth Crusade of 1202, height of the Eastern Roman Empire under Justinian, or later, 1452 to 53, the early Ottoman period, perhaps with an appearance by Vlad Tepes. The monster would have to be luxuriant and decadent. The Fendal would be his choice. Something else that Lewis and I discussed when he did call me, and I did remember this because it tickled me, was by contrast periods that the Doctor should definitely not go to.
Yeah. I think I thought of a few of those by mistake.
Yeah. So, like, for example, I mean, there are some obvious ones, but the one that really stuck in my mind was the Cambodian killing fields under the regime of the Khmer Rouge. Especially given the kind of Cultural Revolution stuff that was going on at the time. Like, you imagine David Tennant pulling out his spectacles and then immediately being carted off by the Khmer Rouge. Not cool.
No.
So basically, no, periods of true atrocity. And indeed, like, all joking aside, like, the controversy around the boy in the striped pajamas, for example, and the way it dealt with the Holocaust, and was very heavily criticised by the Auschwitz Memorial Centre for kind of not just trivialising it, but trying to put the Holocaust through somebody else's eyes. And I haven't seen that film. I haven't read the original source material, but it's so very live ammunition. And one of the things that Lewis said is that oftentimes the best way to handle those subjects is through allegory, something that Doctor Who does extremely well. And indeed, you know, if you think about Genesis of the Daleks and Nazism, and fascism, and the way that that's kind of portrayed through there, and the various discussions of genocide that take place throughout many different stories. Oftentimes these things are best done through allegory, and you can understand, I think, in the modern era so frequently why particularly Russell T Davies used the historical as a sort of knockabout romp, a bit of period theatre. I give a bit greater credit to Stephen Moffat, actually, for example, the Ice Fair episode, I can't remember the name of, but anyway, where the racism of the era is addressed, and again, Chibnall, Partition of India is a bloody brave call, and it is very live, and it's within living memory of very many people, and I think it was handled very sensitively. So it can be done, but it's bloody difficult, and I suppose we have to give Chibnall some credit for trying, right? And succeeding in a couple of things, albeit with guest writers.
Yes, absolutely. And, I mean, I think that is the main thing to say there. No, I mean, that is one of the things that I take away from his era, was that, like, it's rare that you come away from a series of Doctor Who and say, like, well, the historicals were by far the most interesting of this run in the modern series. I think it's like in the Hartnell series, it's a very different game where, like, you know, they're slightly more obscure periods of history, perhaps, and taking slightly bigger swings. I don't know.
And I think it's interesting. Like, I can't remember the name of that, but the Ice Fair episode, it's going to kill me that I don't, especially because we're recording this as live, so I'm having to frantically look it up. But like, I do like the fact that what Moffat has done there is sort of in a neat way. Although he's although he is focused very, very firmly on a sci-fi story, because they're obviously trying to explain away some mysterious goings on. That moment feels like a pure historical moment. Like, if you take these modern people and you put them in that, with their sensibilities, and you put them in that framework, how do they respond to it? And what do we think about the way they're acting? And again, I guess what I would quite like to see in many ways is I'd love to see Russell T Davies have a crack at another pure historical, where they land the TARDIS somewhere, it gets locked behind a wall, like in the Aztecs, and they just have to sort of deal with the shit that comes their way. And you know, they're dressed completely wrongly. Maybe they're in, you know, a society that's not going to accept them for the way they are or who they are, and I fancy that Russell T Davies is not going to shrink away from dealing with some pretty meaty concepts. He didn't in his first run. I just hope he can bring some of that to the historicals rather than just having them be knockabout romps.
There you go. Well, that wraps it up for this episode of I'll Explain Later, but we will be back next week.
We will?
We will.
We will?
We will.
Great.
That's a promise, because actually by the time you hear this, we will have already recorded next week's episode. We've actually got a plan to deliver.
Wibbly wobbly,
these,
timey-wimey.
These bold claims. No, just really good scheduling.
Yep.
So, as always, thank you so much for listening. If you want to get in touch with us...
If either of you want to get in touch with us...
John, are you still manning our Twitter? Is
sure.
that still... Yeah,
absolutely.
Sure. So, @ExplainLaterPod on Twitter, or send us an email. hello@I'llExplainLater.com.
I'll explain later.
hello@I'llExplainLater.com. I'd love to get an email from a listener. That'd be nice, wouldn't it? But as always, thank you so much for listening. We'll be back next week. Take care.
Take care. See you soon.
Bye-bye.